Hello and welcome. I'm the Rambling Director. Today I'm going to do a different kind of film analysis than I typically do, even by my Christmas standards. Today I want to talk more specifically about the religious undertones and symbolism of one of my favorite Christmas films. But first, I feel the need to get some of the garbage out of the way. I know some people find the animation in this film creepy, and that's fine. It does not remotely affect my love for the film at all, personally. I've watched far creepier animation, specifically claymation movies from the 80s and 90s, that I love so much that the animation style specifically is not normally something I find creepy. In fact, I quite like the animation in this film. So it just doesn't affect my love for it. But you are welcome to feel differently. Secondly, by no means is this film for everyone. If you don't like it, I understand that. If you think that the pacing is too slow and the story structure is unbalanced, I wouldn't argue with you. Just because I like the fact that the story structure is very different than most movies doesn't mean that you feeling like, well, we've been at the North Pole for 45 minutes, why isn't the movie over? That's not invalid. That's a perfectly valid criticism because art is subjective. So there will always be places in any analysis video where you will disagree, or places where you might think the movie is flawed, but I think those moments make the film brilliant. All of this is okay as long as we can articulate our different opinions and have an intelligent conversation. Third and finally, this is not meant to be the be-all and end-all interpretation of this film. You may interpret some of this differently, or all of it differently. You may not be a religious person, so some of these observations may mean very little to you. And if that's the case, no harm done. But I will say at the outset, this probably isn't the analysis for you if you aren't a religious person. I'm going to be leaning very heavily into spiritual aspects and mostly Christian interpretation of the themes of this film. So please, feel free to watch and to comment if you disagree, but I didn't want to waste your time if this sort of interpretation just isn't something you're interested in. So if you have better things to watch, don't worry, it's no insult. But if you stick around and you do disagree with my interpretation, then comment and let me know why. Nobody will ever stop trolls from commenting, and that's not what this disclaimer is about. I'm doing this specifically so that you know you are welcome to say I'm reading too much into the film, or that you think completely differently about any of the critiques I give. I want to hear from the people who disagree with me, as well as the people who do agree, so that I can make this analysis better, with opinions that are different from my own. So with that said, let's get right into it. From the first time I saw The Polar Express, I was emotionally gripped by it. There was something very deep about this story, which seemed almost like it was trying to hide behind the brilliant 3D spectacle. And yes, this film, seen in 3D, is an incredible spectacle. If you get the chance to see it in real 3D, do it. You will not regret it. But I always felt this sensational, almost theme park ride elements of the film were trying to dress up and garnish something that is very beautiful, and it keeps the film from being too blatant or coming across as preachy. There is a lot more to this movie than spectacle. There is something deeply religious about this film that spoke to me as a Christian, and you might think or argue that most films based around the subject of faith and challenges of faith should speak to all religious people, or at least some religious people, and I agree entirely. But this one hit me in a very fundamental and basic way. All the levels that I wasn't entirely sure I understood on a conscious level. And this became a tradition in my house that we would watch The Polar Express every Christmas Eve. And I started thinking about the roles of these characters as archetypes and analyzing the way faith and belief affects each character in the situation, and it led me to an entirely new and far greater appreciation of this film. Later on, about at the halfway mark, I'm going to be talking about three characters and their relationship to each other and their relationship to God. And I'll tell you now, the realization of their relationship is the reason I wanted to make this video. So please, hang in until we get there, because we have to meet the hobo character before I can talk too much about it. But before I get ahead of myself, in the words of Julie Andrews, let's start at the very beginning. A very good place to start. Robert Zemeckis' Polar Express is shot in motion capture CGI. I believe it was the first film ever to be entirely filmed with motion capture CGI. Zemeckis is one of the few directors who uses this medium to cast one actor in multiple roles, using CGI to his advantage to create an entirely different look for each person, which would have been far more difficult to do with makeup. This allowed him to cast Tom Hanks in the role of the hero boy, very original name, I know, the conductor, the hobo, and Santa Claus. Now you may be wondering where I'm going with this, but I promise it is important that you know that on the outset. The film opens on a street that could be a Christmas card before the title appears. The title scrolls up to the middle and then eventually disappears off the top of the screen. Most films would have had the title fade in, centered, but this one shows the title ascending. Now maybe I'm reading too much into the little tiny details, but I believe this was an intentional choice to get the audience thinking of an ascent, which is what the story is. An ascent to a higher level of spiritual being. Then the camera pans into the window, and we meet a young boy. This is the star of the film, and many of you will know him as the hero boy, but he actually does have a name. His character's name is Chris. Although his name is never said in the film, and in fact he's credited in the end credits as the hero boy, allowing the audience to see themselves through the character. In other words, he could be anyone from anywhere, but his name, at least during the filming phase, and his official name on the website, is Chris. Which makes sense, because the book was written in the first person, and the author of the book is Chris Van Allsburg. A pretty neat little Easter egg. In the beginning, Chris is laying sleeplessly in his bed. This is established through an opening narration by Chris as an adult. He reads the opening lines of the original children's book that the film is based on. Quote, "On Christmas Eve many years ago, I lay quietly in my bed. I did not rustle the sheets. I breathed slowly and silently. I was listening for a sound I was afraid I would never hear. The ringing bells of Santa's sleigh." From this one line of dialogue, we set up from the first minute of the film. This child is starting to doubt the existence of Santa. And the proof he needs to believe is the sound of the sleigh bells. This is not a throwaway line, but rather a brilliant setup for what comes much later in the film. He opens his eyes when he hears jingle bells and checks out the window. Seeing nothing there, he goes downstairs to see his father wearing a Santa Claus hat before taking it off and setting down Chris's little sister. Chris is understandably disappointed and quickly retreats back to his bedroom. He overhears his little sister telling her parents that he had been telling her that Santa is not real, and the parents try to comfort her, assuring her that her brother is only trying to mess with her. As they close the little sister's door, he sees the Santa hat hanging out of his father's back pocket. We now know the logistical concerns that are bothering Chris because of his little sister bringing them up, such as Santa's sleigh needing to fly faster than the speed of light, or the sleigh needing to be bigger than an ocean liner to hold all the presents. As soon as the parents go downstairs, Chris pulls out some materials that he has collected throughout the year, which show us how long this crisis of faith has been going on. There's a photograph of his little sister with a shopping mall Santa whose beard she is pulling off as the camera is flashing. The other is a newspaper clipping of department store Santas on strike. And finally is the famous Saturday Evening Post magazine called The Discovery, which features a Norman Rockwell painting of a child holding an empty Santa suit that he has pulled out of his father's dresser drawer. Chris then goes to his encyclopedia set and opens to the chapter on the North Pole, which has a section clearly labeled Devoid of Life. Hearing his parents coming, Chris quickly jumps back in bed. He hears his parents talking about how doubtful he has been lately, and his father comments that he's getting about that age. Although they both hope he won't stop believing yet, because that would be, quote, the end of the magic. A phrase which causes Chris to open his eyes sharply with a look of horror. Before leaving, his father says, not even an express train could wake him up now. This clearly plants the seed in the viewer's mind that the following will all be a dream, like in The Wizard of Oz. The parents leave, and now, left alone, he lays sleeplessly listening for Santa's sleigh once again. At about 5 minutes till midnight, he suddenly opens his eyes like something has stirred him. He hears the noise of an approaching train. I love the way this moment combines the train with some real-life sound effects, such as the metal frisbee rattling against the radiator, and then the hissing of the radiator letting off steam in combination with the train's whistle. It begins a pattern of dreamlike behavior and logic, which constantly causes us to question whether anything we are seeing is actually a dream. On the way out the door, Chris grabs his bathrobe, and he rips the pocket of his bathrobe open, spilling marbles everywhere. That may seem like an insignificant detail, but it actually is very important later. Running outside, Chris sees the train parked in the street in an amazing recreation of the book cover. And the conductor, of course, standing outside, who confirms the boy's identity to be Chris by showing him a clipboard and asking if it's him. Then he asks Chris if he's coming with them. Chris asks where they're going, and the conductor famously announces, "Why, to the North Pole, of course! This is the Polar Express!" At first, Chris says he's not coming. The train begins to roll away, but as it picks up speed, he runs after it and jumps on board. The conductor is waiting for him and offers to let him into one of the train compartments. Once inside, Chris meets Hero Girl, whose real name is Holly, and Know-It-All Kid, whose real name is, well, Know-It-All Kid. Holly, of course, is a name that really bears no further explanation. She already has the spirit of Christmas down, and even her name is a holly jolly symbol of that. Holly is completely enraptured with the idea of what is going on, but Chris is not so sure. He actually still has doubts that any of this is real, or, at the very least, he has doubts that the train is going to the North Pole. I love that when the Know-It-All Kid asks Chris if he knows what kind of train this is, Holly confidently responds, "Of course, it's a magic train." And naturally, the Know-It-All Kid goes on to inform them of the precise model of the train. As the train steams on, they pass a department store called Herpelsheimer's, which is actually a real-life department store in Grand Rapids, Michigan, which is where Chris Van Allsburg grew up in real life. That's a great little detail, isn't it? The store has a mechanical Santa out front, and seeing the clockwork in the back of the mechanical Santa only seems to confirm Chris's mindset on the complete artificiality of Santa Claus. Little miracles like the ticket appearing in their pockets as the beginning proofs of faith are really cool. The conductor takes each kid's ticket, and with the hole punch, he prints 2 letters in each child's ticket. Of course, this is a question to heighten the anticipation of what will be learned throughout the film, because I think we all know instinctively that whatever is ultimately written on those tickets will teach kids something they need to learn. I like that this also makes the conductor seem sort of psychic, or at least like he has a foresight that nobody else does. And rather than showing them outright the message they need to learn by the end of the journey, he actually just gives them a hint of what they might be learning by the end of the journey. They stop at the next house to pick up a child named Billy the Lonely Boy. Subtle name, right? Billy, just like Chris, is hesitant to get on, but when the train starts moving and riding away from him, Billy is not fast enough to catch up and falls in the snow. Thinking quickly, Chris grabs the emergency brake and stops the train. The conductor is understandably upset about this, but Holly explains why Chris did it, and the conductor sees Billy get onto the train and lets them off the hook. The conductor goes to the front and says over the loudspeaker, "The refreshments will be available to any child who wants them." When all the children raise their hands that they want refreshment, we get the start of one of the most fun musical sequences ever put in a film, the hot chocolate number. What on earth can I say about this that hasn't literally been said by everyone who's ever seen it? It's funny, it's brilliant, it's magical. The choreography of the CGI dancers borders between hilariously complicated and magically ridiculous. It's just a damn good scene. The hot chocolate song and the magical waiters, I think, also represent sort of a spiritual experience. It is, just like the tickets, clearly magical, just like the train itself, something which no one could explain. Yet, Chris is witnessing all of this and still having doubts. Either the whole thing is some sort of cruel joke or it's just a dream. To him, those are the only options. This, I think, was to illustrate the fact that humans, in the face of incredible, even miraculous events and situations, can still choose to doubt. And we do get a pretty good analysis as to why that is in just a bit. Holly hides a cup of hot chocolate under the seat with the plan to take it to Billy, who has been forgotten by the hot chocolate chefs. She starts to take the cocoa to Billy herself, but Chris and Know-It-All Boy say she should wait for an adult to accompany her. She says it'll be fine, but when Chris asks her if she is sure, she pauses. This is the beginning of her character arc, where we see that she is a great leader, who just lacks confidence in her own decisions. She knows what to do, she knows what the right thing to do is, but she just lacks the confidence to do it. Maybe this is because she's a woman in the 1950s. Maybe it's because she's black in the 1950s. If we are talking about the logistics of the physical world, then these make sense. But since the entire story is symbolic anyway, I think that it just shows that Holly has a lack of faith too. A lack of faith in herself. The conductor takes her to give Billy the chocolate, and while she's gone, Chris notices that she has forgotten her ticket. Fearing that the conductor will be mad at her for not having her ticket, Chris tries to cross to the next compartment to take the ticket to her, but the wind whips it out of his hand. Taking the ticket back to Holly is dream logic yet again. What does it mean to be trying to return something to someone in a dream? Well, returning something is usually a representation of the cycle of life. It can represent something preventing you or stopping you from moving forward, and it usually means that you're going in a positive direction, spiritually speaking, anyway. Now, did Zemeckis intend this? Maybe not, but I think we all have the same instinct subconsciously. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to find psychological reasons for having certain dreams that apply to nearly everyone. Our brains are pretty similar in terms of how they're wired, and it fits nicely with the dreamlike feeling of making progress before having that progress whipped away. The ticket being returned through a supernatural journey back to the Polar Express also, I think, can be seen as how far God, or whatever higher power you want to believe in, goes to bring things back to the way they need to be, or bring things back to us that we need specifically. There's another element of dream logic in that the ticket could have just disappeared and reappeared back in her pocket. I can't think of any reason that couldn't have happened, which makes me think that this happened specifically, symbolically, to show how that greater power might look after us. As Chris goes to return Holly's ticket, he climbs up in the top of the train and walks along trying to find them. And ironically enough, he's following the conductor and Holly by a bright light shining in the darkness. The light he is following eventually becomes the light of a fire, and this is where we meet the hobo. I'm going to go ahead and spoil this for you because I want to talk about the meaning of the hobo. The hobo is a ghost or spirit. This is proven, absolutely. He is a spirit of some kind who haunts the Polar Express, and through some wonderfully subversive dialogue, we hear the hobo voicing Christopher's concerns about faith. That being, he's afraid of believing in something ultimately to be made a fool of by it. The hobo says he owns the train, that he's the king of the North Pole. Chris asks, what about Santa? Isn't he the king of the North Pole? And the hobo answers in a very interesting way, in terms of how it's phrased. He says, what is your persuasion on the big man? The big man is normally a phrase that people reserve, in terms of slang, to talk about God, not Santa Claus. Chris answers that he wants to believe, but, ... the hobo cuts him off, saying, but you don't want to be bamboozled. You don't want to be led down the primrose path. You don't want to be conned or duped, have the wool pulled over your eyes, hoodwinked. You don't want to be taken for a ride, railroaded. All of these are, interestingly enough, terms that people use about not just spiritual and supernatural things, but for the idea of a deity or religion. We don't want to be made fools of. We don't want to turn out to be wrong and become the laughingstock of the world or the laughingstock of our friends for what we've chosen to believe. It's very relatable, But when expressed in its simplest form like this, you can also see what a prideful position it is, even if it is a relatable one. It really does come down to the shame and embarrassment of potentially being wrong, while ignoring the benefits of belief in a greater power, whether or not you are right or wrong. The hobo says, "Seeing is believing. Am I right?" But Chris pauses, instinctively knowing that he cannot agree with that statement because he has seen so much that night and still doesn't believe. So he asks the next logical question: what about this train? Because he has seen, heck, he's been on it, but he still can't believe it. The hobo asks, "What about it?" Chris asks if they are really going to the North Pole, and the hobo says, "Aren't we?" Chris slowly asks if this is all just a dream, and the hobo says, "You said it, kid, not me." I really love how the hobo never lies to him or misleads him. He simply asks his own questions back to him. He holds up a mirror to Chris a few times during this film and shows him his own doubtful nature, but without ever pushing him to make a decision. Then, to close the conversation, the hobo turns back to Chris before they go to look for Holly and asks him simply, "Oh, one last thing. Do you believe in ghosts?" Chris shakes his head. The hobo responds, "Interesting," and quickly walks toward the engine, disappearing into the storm and leaving Chris alone. Whew. Okay, there's a lot in that, isn't there? I mean, there's the fact that why would you want to believe in Santa if you don't want to believe in ghosts and don't even know about ghosts? Why would you want to believe in the supernatural if you don't believe in ghosts? Why would you believe in the idea of something, of some ultimate good in the world, or even beyond the world? But now we have met our two big players in my theological blueprint for this movie's symbolism. And I want to talk a little bit about those roles, the roles of some of these characters, because this, as I said at the beginning, is the reason I wanted to make this video. Because no one else seems to have ever pointed this out in any kind of YouTube video. In fact, I've never even seen any other analyses of this movie. But I think this is a fascinating way of looking at this film when you're an adult. So we have met a conductor who cares for these children's well-being and gets them on the train to lead them to a greater power. A conductor who's willing to clean up the messes and coach the children through their hardships. He takes the brunt of the hard work and is constantly warning that they are running out of time to find their faith. He also is the one who gives the children their tickets, magically of course, and punches those tickets, allowing them to go see Father Christmas. He is always anxiously suffering in the background trying to make this trip happen. The second person is a spirit, constantly represented by shining lights, either his headlamp or his fire, who sympathizes and helps Chris define his faith by asking him questions that probe the depths of his soul and get him thinking. He also convicts him of his bad choice by constantly calling out his doubt in the face of evidence. And through that conviction, he calls Chris to believe. And finally, we have an old man with a big white beard, Father Christmas, a fatherly character who is very loving and nurturing to the children. And when we finally meet him, he is ultimately about to begin his journey to judge the children by rewarding good behavior and punishing bad behavior. But of course, before punishing the bad behavior, he gives the kids, like the know-it-all kid, another chance to change. He also rewards the newest prodigal child, who finds their faith that very night with the greatest gifts, greater than the other children who had their faith all along but struggled in different areas. And of course, the conductor and the spirit had the sole job of getting the kids to the Father. Father Christmas, that is. Do you see where I'm going with this? Yes, there is hardly any chance that Zemeckis didn't see this parallel when he was writing the script, especially when he expands the role of the conductor so much compared to the book, and the hobo character is entirely his original addition to the property. The conductor is Jesus, the homeless ghost is the Holy Ghost, and the Father Christmas character is God the Father. You may think I'm reading too much into this, and at first I kind of did too, but think about even the choice of actors. All three characters are played by the same actor. 3 personalities in one being, the Trinity. And of course, Chris, although voiced by a different actor, has the physical movements and characteristics based on the motion capture of Tom Hanks. So this is an experience of seeing God through your own life. If God lives in all of us in some form, then surely we would see ourselves in Him. And of course, I can't forget to mention that Chris's dad is also played by Tom Hanks. And who do most boys tend to base their image of manhood on? Their father, of course. And all 3, Father Christmas, the conductor, and the homeless spirit, are needed for the boy to find his faith. The conductor getting him on the train and taking him to the Father. The Spirit showing him along the way that ghosts and supernatural elements do exist, and that he should have conviction that when he has the experience of God or of Father Christmas, that he needs to believe it rather than constantly doubting everything that he experiences in his life. And finally, the desire to see the Father with his own eyes and hear the sound of his glorious, one could say, heavenly bells, the bells that usher in the kingdom. Even the idea of bells is frequently associated with heaven in, of course, going to church. I just love this whole idea, and again, I've never heard anybody else talk about it, but to me, it's the essence of this journey. Of course, you could have told this story with any holiday, really, but they chose Christmas, a Christian holiday based on the coming of a Savior, who would eventually be the one who judges the nice and the naughty at the end of time. I just have to think that this was done on purpose. I can't think this was a coincidence. I thought about this during the editing process, and I wanted to just include it really quickly. There was a deleted scene in the Polar Express, which was called It Takes Two. It was a song between the 2 train engineers. They sing a song, and after that, Chris tells them that the quote-unquote king brought him to the engine. Both of them start to shake with fear, and then they recite a little poem, which tells the supposed origins of the hobo, which says that in the year 33, right before Christmas, the hobo, who was named King, decided to ride on the train for free. And he was riding on the roof, and then when they came to the top of the tunnel, flat top, he was scraped off the top of the train because he couldn't get down fast enough. Now, I actually think that this little bit of information was meant to be a red herring to the audience. And I'm not just saying that because of my theory, I'm saying that because there is no way in the year 33 AD there was a train traveling. Keep in mind, St. Nicholas wasn't even born yet. I mean, this was literally the year Jesus died, so, or roughly around that time period. So, Christmas was not even celebrated yet, let alone would there be any reason for the Polar Express to exist, and trains didn't even exist at the time. So I think this was just a legend that is told on the Polar Express, maybe a legend of the North Pole, but there's absolutely no way that the hobo actually is the one in this backstory. So I did want to include that in case anybody mentioned it. Holly actually counters it by saying, well, he could be an angel rather than a ghost. Maybe he's a guardian angel. And I think that interpretation works far better than the idea that the story that the 2 engineers are telling is actually true. So I just wanted to throw that in there really quickly before we continue on. The hobo gets Chris to the engine, where he finds out that Holly has been put in charge of the train, while the conductor and the 2 engineers fix the headlight. When the engineers call for the train to stop, Holly says they have to put on the brake, but Chris sows doubt in Holly's mind as to which lever is the brake. This is the second time that Chris has asked her if she is sure of the right thing to do, and both times this doubt has stopped her from doing the right thing. which she knew in her heart was the right thing. This shows how doubt not only festers in a single person, but how doubt spreads intrapersonally, just like faith does. The train stops for Caribou Crossing, but soon they are all on their way again. But the lake that covers the tracks has frozen over them and leaves the train on a sheet of ice. Eventually, they skid to a stop, but the ice begins to break up. The train speeds towards a gorge where the tracks continue. But as the train skids and swerves on the ice, Holly, the conductor, and Chris are nearly thrown off the front of the train. The ghostly hobo appears again and pulls the characters back from the edge, literally saving their lives before disappearing into flakes of snow. With the spirit pulling them back from the edge of disaster, and the whole time the conductor shouting directions to the engineer to literally get them back on the rails. I can't be the only one seeing this. The best movies, I think, do show you metaphors without shoving them down your throat. And in this case, if we accept the conductor's role as a messianic Jesus archetype, I don't really see much better reason to believe it than him metaphorically and literally getting the children's lives back on track. Once they are back on the rails and steaming up a beautifully unique mountain scene, the conductor tells a story about being saved from falling off the train many years ago. He says that he nearly slipped and fell off the top of the train, but something pulled him back. Chris logically asks if the conductor saw this person and what he looked like, because obviously Chris is thinking that it's the hobo. But in one of the most uniquely powerful moments of the film, the conductor turns to him and says, "No, I didn't see him." But sometimes seeing is believing, and other times the most real things in the world are the things we can't see. Chris clearly has his doubts. Once back inside, we enter a compartment where Father Christmas is collecting all the toys that have been damaged or mistreated and thrown away, and he picks them up and refurbishes them to re-gift them to kids who will appreciate them. We see that the Polar Express is not just a trip for children, but a trip for their toys to go and serve someone else. We see this later, but gifts seem to represent spiritual experiences that lead to faith. Santa himself says almost exactly this later. So perhaps these toys represent gifts of faith that have been ignored or mistreated by those who wish to reject them despite the evidence. This seems confirmed by the fact that the hobo spirit is puppeteering a marionette of Ebenezer Scrooge and having it scream at Chris that he is a doubter. Now, although the marionette Scrooge doesn't say it here, remember that Scrooge and Marley have a conversation about faith in spirits. Marley asks Scrooge, "Why don't you believe the evidence of your senses?" And later on in the conversation, he can give no answer as to what evidence he would need to believe. I think that this is another representation of the Holy Spirit, convicting people. Because think about it, after all he's seen, he's literally been on the front of a train, skidding over ice. They escaped certain death falling into the river, or into the lake rather, and yet he still does not believe what is going on here. Now, I do appreciate that some people, when they think about this logically, might be tempted to say, "Oh, come on, kid, that's so dumb." But how many of us do that? I'm talking specifically about people of faith. Okay, if you're not a person of faith, then this probably doesn't apply to you. But as people of faith, we experience all of these things that seem to confirm for us the presence of God in our lives, and yet we still are constantly ungrateful. We still are constantly not taking the hint. Next, we come back to Billy, the lonely boy, the kid in the back of the train that Chris stopped the train for earlier. Billy's singing a song. Now, I've heard from many people who are friends of mine, and I've also heard many reviewers online say that they think the song is unnecessary. I personally could not agree less. I think the song is terribly important to Billy's character. He is singing about how he's wishing that he had faith, wishing he could believe. He says, "I guess that Santa's busy because he's never come around," meaning that Santa has never visited Billy. It's strange, but I know many people of faith, even people who go to church every Sunday, who have talked to me about this exact thing. I believe in God. I want to believe in God. But in the end, I've never felt His presence. I've never felt like God is really giving me anything to confirm that my faith means diddly squat to Him. And guess what? I've been there too. Perhaps that's why I feel this song so deeply. Holly goes to talk to Billy and sing to him, I should say. She sings about the lovely things that Christmas brings, but Billy says he's never seen or experienced those things. Man, I'm tearing up thinking about this. I'm just a big softie, okay? If you're gonna watch any of my other videos, you need to know now. I'm just a big softie, okay? I cry over everything. I didn't used to be this way. I just got soft in my old age. Where they come together in literal harmony is after Holly sings the line, "No one will be sleeping on the night of Christmas Eve," and together they sing, "Hoping Santa's on his way," because Billy still does hope. Even though his hope has been repeatedly crushed, the song indicates that he still has the hope to think that maybe Santa might still visit him. The song ends with Holly saying, "The herald angels sing," and Billy says, "I never hear a sound." This prefigures the sound of the bells, which we're about to get to. Holly finishes the song by singing, "And all the dreams of children," to which Billy replies, "What's lost will all be found," because that's all he wants, is to be found. And again, even that little lyric calls back to the song Amazing Grace. Even that little bit of a song calls back to the spiritual point. I once was lost, but now am found. I think this is beautifully illustrated by the fact that Billy is said outright to be poor, one of society's outcasts, much like Bob Cratchit. But he has yet to receive the spirit of Christmas the way Bob Cratchit did. How did Bob and his family find hope and consolation? Their faith in a higher power and their faith in each other, combined with their faith in humanity. How do I know? Why do I point out that little parallel? Because think about it this way. Chris lacks faith in a higher power. Billy lacks faith in friends/humanity, and Holly lacks faith in herself. 3 types of faith that the Cratchits have, and despite their poverty, they are truly one of the happiest families in fiction. Another little hint at the religious undertones in this film comes if you listen carefully to the end of the song, or if you listen to the full version on the soundtrack, it's even clearer. If you notice, the end of the music actually turns into the hymn, "This is my Father's World." They're arriving, which causes the conductor to cry with joy, which is always something both heartwarming and kind of funny. They even point out that the North Pole looks like a giant ship in the middle of a great frozen ocean. This is a line directly from the book, but in this specific interpretation, I want to point out it could also be a symbolic ark, like Noah's Ark, a place where life is thriving in the middle of an area that is otherwise devoid of life. As they arrive in the North Pole, the conductor tells them that Father Christmas will choose one of them to receive the first gift of Christmas. Chris and Holly see that Billy is staying on the train, and so even though they're in line to see Santa, they go back to convince him to come out and see Santa with them. And I always appreciated that the conductor could clearly see Chris and Holly leave the line, but he lets them go. He says nothing. It's a nice little touch, like he understands more of what is going on than he lets on to the kids. I also like how Holly reaches Billy during the song with sympathy, but Chris reaches him during the argument by using direct language, and even with a kind of harsh tone, probably a tone he'd heard his dad use before. Telling Billy, "Listen, I don't know if Christmas is going to work out for you or not, but this is Christmas Eve, and you shouldn't spend it alone." Billy seems just about to be convinced and to go. But just then, the caboose of the train is unhooked and they speed backward through the streets of the North Pole. The hobo spirit appears to show Chris where the brake is on the contraption so they can stop the car. And another interesting use of the hobo here is that he shows the kids. He gives them information, in contrast to the conductor who is physically doing things for them. The kids are also able to walk across a slippery, icy railroad track over a chasm, all of them wearing slippers and without dying. If you need any more proof that there are miracles in this movie, there you go. I also love the way the records are all skipping. Like the music is playing, but it skips. I've always wondered if this is because time has stood still at 5 minutes until 12. That maybe on North Pole time has literally stopped, and so the records are skipping in one place until it resumes. It's a great little touch. Holly says she can lead them back based on where the noises they hear seem to be coming from. I really like that Billy and Holly can hear the crowd of elves celebrating, but Chris can't hear them until he sees them. It's a very nice, subtle little touch that I didn't pick up on until I was writing this analysis. Holly says she can lead them on the way back, and Chris asks if she's sure. This time, Holly turns around and very confidently says, "Absolutely." They come down the stairs into a surveillance room, where Chris asks them why he can't hear anything, but they can't answer it. We also see elves who get a last-minute notification that a kid named Steven has been naughty, but upon reviewing, they decide that since it's so close to Christmas Day, they're gonna let this kid off the hook, but put him on the check twice list next year. The kids take a giant version of one of those big vacuum tubes you see at the bank and end up in a present wrapping section of the workshop. As they go through, they notice that the machines have started up all by themselves, and they are maneuvering around one single present on its way across the conveyor belt. This present is addressed to Billy, the first gift he has ever received on Christmas. Billy at first seems like he doesn't know what to do, and then realizing this is his only chance, he dives after the present. He grabs it with all of his might and never lets go. They follow the conveyor belt and end up in a giant version of one of those coin things you see at the mall, and end up falling straight into Santa's bag. The bag is raised up along with them, and then raised into the air by a blimp. As they are carried through the air high above the North Pole City, we see that Billy is still holding on to his presents for dear life. He shakes it and says, "I think I know what this is. I've wanted one of these my whole life." Yet, when they notice that there's a sticker that says "Do not open until Christmas," Billy follows the rules and does not open the present. The aerial view of the North Pole City also looks vaguely like some of the artwork depicting heaven, complete with an angelic choir singing a theme over them. Billy is suddenly dragged into the piles of presents by a hand. Chris and Holly grab Billy and stop him from being dragged completely down, but Billy keeps hold of the present with one hand. Even as they're saying, "Give me both hands, or I can't pull you up, you gotta give me both hands," he won't let go of that gift. Whatever it cost him, Billy is not going to lose that gift. Of course, eventually Billy is pulled out. It turns out it's the know-it-all kid who snuck out to see what he was getting for Christmas and assumes the others were doing the same. Eventually the bag lands in the sleigh, and as they get out of the bag, the elves help them to slide down the bag like a sliding board and meet the conductor again, who encourages them or chastises them according to their need. Notice he's angry with the know-it-all kid, but says, "Nice to see you again," to Holly, and then to Chris he says, "Cutting it kind of close, aren't we?" Now notice that Chris is still the only one who disbelieves. Holly is now complete, having learned to have faith in herself and her leadership. Know-it-all kid believes, but he's filled with pride, one of the worst of the 7 deadly sins, and has now been chastised for it. Chris, however, is cutting it close. Santa is coming. Santa is nearly here. The Santa is nigh. And he's still on the fence about this. It's subtle, but I just love storytelling like that, where Even little throwaway lines serve the grand theme of the movie. We see that Billy does not want to let go of his gift, understandably so, but one of the elves guarantees him that they will get it back to him safely. He just has to trust them. And so Billy, finally having found the faith in other people that he needed, lets go of the gift that he has always wanted, confident that they will bring it back to him. Santa's arrival is also heralded by trumpets, just like Christ's arrival was, and will be again, of course. As the kids watch the elves bring out Santa's bells, the string of bells, and put them on the reindeer, as the rest of the kids are enchanted by it, even Billy, who all say it's the most beautiful sound they've ever heard. But Chris is unable to hear the bells, and neither are we. I love the build-up to Santa in this. Like, you feel the epicness of this moment, but also the horrible lack of sound when the bells jingle is what I'd imagine the realization that you have sensory deafness would feel like. You know, something that you know should be making sound is muted. But everything else is fine. You can hear everything else. It's unbelievably sad and troublesome moment as a viewer. Every time I watch it, it makes me feel very anxious. Finally, the great doors open and Santa comes out, and the children all get to see Santa for the very first time. But because the elves, who are all standing in the way, Chris cannot see him. This is a fantastic visual of showing that seeing isn't always believing. Sometimes you have to believe before you can see. Now, as the film goes into slow motion, Chris notices that one of the bells have come loose from the reindeer sleigh as the reindeers are galloping and chomping at the bit to get going. The bell flies off and lands right at Chris's feet. When he picks up the bell, he rings it, and this time he doesn't hear nothing. This time he hears the homeless spirit whispering the word, doubter, doubter, to him. This seems to indicate that the spirit led that bell to Chris. As tears fill his eyes and it becomes more frustrating, Chris says, okay, I believe. He keeps saying, I believe, repeatedly, professing his faith verbally. And suddenly, he hears the beautiful sound of the bell. This is just marvelous because once again it calls back to that religious subtext. The idea that faith is a decision. You have to make the choice to believe. It's not a gift that is just given to you. Like with all gifts, you have to accept it before it becomes yours. Speaking specifically is important in Christian theology. It's stated repeatedly in the New Testament that you must profess your faith out loud. St. Paul actually uses the oldest known creed in Christian history, meaning that it was something that was given to everybody, that you had to profess this faith verbally, acknowledging it as the truth. You have to profess your trust in your faith verbally when you have everything to gain and everything to lose. You can't be ashamed of what you believe, because what you believe makes you who you are. You can't be afraid that you will be bamboozled by it, or made a fool of because you chose to believe it. You have to acknowledge, as Chris does, for the first time in the entire movie, that he doesn't just want to believe. Like he said to the hobo, he has chosen to do so. And as soon as he says, I believe, and rings the bell, Santa walks up behind him, and we see the reflection of Santa in the bell before we see his face. It's a brilliant little beat. Chris looks almost scared for a moment before turning around to look Santa in the face. Then, of course, just like Billy did before him, Chris gives the gift back to Santa. Santa doesn't ask for it, though, like the elves do with Billy. Chris willingly gives it back, saying, I believe this is yours. He got what he wanted, what he needed, his faith. And now he doesn't feel the need to hold on to the bell or fight to keep it because now he has believed. He has seen. Santa tells the know-it-all kid that he needs to have more humility. He compliments Holly on her good work as a leader, and then he acknowledges Billy by name. telling him that there is no greater gift than friendship. Some complain that the only person whose name we hear in the entire movie is Billy. But I like this because Billy may have had the thought, as many people do about God, I wonder if he even knows my name. But Santa gives him a little extra gift by showing him that he knows him and cares about him personally. Chris is chosen to receive the first gift of Christmas. And I love the image of Santa in his sleigh beckoning Chris to come sit on his lap. There's just something so beautifully Christmas about that, and so epic in terms of the symbolism of this moment, and I just love it. He asks Chris what he wants for Christmas, and after a moment's thought, Chris whispers in his ear. Santa even thinks about the gift choice for a moment before acknowledging it with a hearty "indeed." Then he lifts the bell high in the air, showing the audience and the audience within the film the bell is the first gift of Christmas. Santa then says, "This bell is a wonderful symbol of the spirit of Christmas, as am I. Just remember, the true spirit of Christmas lies in your heart." A gift is, quite literally, in real life, not in the movie, in real life, it is a symbol. But what the gift represents is internal. A gift from your wife might represent the love between you. It itself is meaningless. It means nothing without the context. And that bell can be lost, but faith never can be, which is why he was willing to give it up. A lot of people don't get why Chris has the most doubts, but then he gets the gift. But it makes perfect sense because God always gives gifts, more gifts, to those who need it. Because we aren't all in the same place. Remember the story of the prodigal son. And the other son who has been there all along doesn't get it. He's like, "I've been here all along. I've been faithful to you. I've not done the things he's done. Why are you celebrating him?" And the father just simply says, he needs it more. He was lost, but now he's come home. What's lost will all be found. Back to the movie, though. I love that the conductor is watching the kids as Santa is flying away, and they're all enraptured with Santa flying away, but he's watching the kids, and he's smiling to himself. It's a magical little moment that shows that the conductor, while he can be harsh and strict, also loves his job, and he loves bringing these kids to see Santa and to see their reaction to this incredibly probably the most magical thing they'll ever see in their lives. Santa leaving is also very intense. It sends chills up my spine every time I watch the film, as a matter of fact. It's one of the most victorious and powerful moments in any Christmas movie ever. And as far as Christmas movies made for kids, it probably is the most powerful moment. But what gives the moment probably its biggest emotional punch is Billy saying, "Could all this be nothing but a dream?" And without missing a beat, Chris looks to him, shakes his head and says, "No." He doesn't over-explain it. He doesn't add anything to it. He just says, "No." Because he has that faith. He will not even entertain the idea that this was not real anymore. That is faith fulfilled. Now we see the three sides of faith completely fulfilled through their tickets. Holly's ticket says lead. Billy's ticket says several things to him. Among them, depend on and count on. And, of course, faith in the higher power when Chris receives his ticket, which is stamped believe. And I've always really loved that moment in particular. Because it starts off with the conductor saying, "Ah, yes, the young man with all the questions." And then once he gives Chris the ticket, Chris says, "It says," but before he can read believe out loud, the conductor cuts him off and says, "It's nothing I need to see." Faith in God, faith in a higher power, that's internal. Nobody has to see it at first. It's a choice we make internally. And it will necessarily change everything that we do. Great actions follow faith, naturally, as the Bible says in the book of James. "Show me your faith without works, and I will show you my faith by my works. But it starts with a profession of faith. It starts with the words, I believe, and ends with that faith growing into a great tree that produces amazing fruits, and those fruits are the actions you live by, your works, which are done because of your belief. That makes me think that this is something this kid is going to carry with him into life, that Chris's life will be changed because of his belief. Upon getting into the train, Chris realizes that the bell from Santa's sleigh has fallen through the hole in his pocket. Understandably, he's disappointed, and the others offer to help him to find the bell before the train lurches into motion and it's too late. The train starts home. Now, it used to drive me crazy as a kid that when we come back to Billy's house, we never see what's in his present. But as I've grown, as an adult, I've realized that we do see what's in it. Billy says it's a thing he wanted all his life. I think that gift is a friend. Faith in other people. The confidence to make friends. The ability to look outside himself and see the good in other people. Remember that Billy, Holly, and Chris are all in the same town. Maybe they even go to the same school. And maybe after Christmas break, he knows that he can go back to school and he will have a friend in those two people. Either way, seeing Billy's Christmas tree lit up for the first time, and then seeing him run back out on the front porch screaming for his friends on the train to look that he's received his present, it always just makes my heart burst with joy. Upon seeing Billy has already gotten his gift, Chris has faith that Santa will bring the bell back to him. Now, I want to jump ahead a little bit because it turns out that Chris does not get the bell back that night. That night, Santa has not visited his house yet. And so I think that maybe what they're getting at is that because Billy had the greater need, he was served first. Which, again, is a biblical element. Jesus said, the first among you will be the last will be the first, referring to those who were poor and downtrodden, that those who exalt themselves on earth will be last, and those who were meek on earth will be first. I also like that the know-it-all boy is genuinely trying. He says things like, oh, that's too bad, and then he starts to walk away, and then he turns back and goes, really? It's just a great little element. Chris arrives home, and he and Holly say their goodbyes with hugs and adorably awkward handshakes. The know-it-all boy even comments that it was the thought that counts, and that although the gift of the bell is lost, it was the thought that counts, and I just find that to be really funny and cute. It's cool to see that the experience with Santa, talking to Santa, has actually changed him. And Chris thanks the conductor as he gets out. He thanks him for everything, and the conductor thanks him back, saying, one thing about trains is that it doesn't matter where they're going. What really matters is deciding to get on. I always loved the image of Holly nervously thinking about what to do and then going back into the train. It speaks volumes to what might happen after this story is over. The fact that they are either sensing a friendship that will last forever, or judging by their body language, maybe they've developed a little crush on each other. At a time when black people and white people didn't interact that way. It always made me think that maybe his faith in the meaning of Christmas might have a real-life role to play later on. Maybe these two saw each other, but wouldn't interact because of their skin color. But because of the journey they've taken together on the Polar Express, perhaps they find the courage to be friends. By pointing out Billy's poverty, we see that this movie isn't shying away from social messages like that, about the differences between these three friends, and even attitudes between people of different mental states, like Billy and the know-it-all boy becoming friends by the end and sitting together. When at the beginning, the know-it-all boy would certainly not have hung out with somebody that he verbally acknowledged was from the, quote, wrong side of the tracks. So perhaps this little moment with Holly shows that this will change their opinions of each other in the sunlit world as well. The conductor acts as though it's been an honor to serve them, despite the fact that he could be a little uptight. As the train rides out of Chris's life forever, the hobo spirit sits on top once again with his fire, and waves to the boy before disappearing into the snow. Again, a little suggestion that makes me think he represents the Holy Spirit. The conductor leaves, but the Spirit disappears to become the snow that is currently all around Chris, as if he will be with him even though the train is gone. Chris sees that Santa has not visited him yet, but he goes to bed with faith that everything will be okay. The next morning, Chris's sister wakes him up, and as he goes to put on his bathrobe, he rips the pocket again and the marbles spill out. For a moment, his face seems to suggest that perhaps it was all a dream. There's even a similar train riding around the Christmas tree. He sees puppets, just like the ones in the recycling room, and we wonder if maybe it wasn't all a dream. Then the sister finds one last gift for Chris. It's the bell from Santa's sleigh and a letter from Santa himself. The note and the bell belong to Chris forever now. The parents ask about the gift, and upon taking it from him, they ring it, but neither parent can hear it. When we get the final narration from the book, Chris lays the bell on the table and goes to experience Christmas with his family. The narration goes like this. At one time, most of my friends could hear the bell, but as years passed, it fell silent for all of them. Even Sarah found one Christmas that she could no longer hear its sweet sound. Though I've grown old, the bell still rings for me, as it does for all who truly believe. I think what makes this film so great, and why it stands up as a real classic of the holiday, is because it isn't just for kids. It is a message more for adults than for kids. It's daring us to do what I think most of us instinctively want to do, which is to believe in something bigger than ourselves. Now, if you're not religious, that's fine. That doesn't affect how I feel about you. I would be your friend gladly. My best friend is an atheist, so it doesn't say anything about you in a negative way. And all I'm saying is that there is a reason why the majority of the world is religious. I think we instinctively want to believe in something bigger than us. And this is a film that challenges us to do that. Challenges us to believe in something more. Whether it's to believe in ourselves when we lack the confidence in our decisions, or to believe in our fellow man and in the goodness of our fellow man, in the friendships and in the family, whether blood or non-blood relations, family, that we form in our lives. To have faith in those things. And yeah, to have faith in something greater. In my worldview, that's God. And to me, those things are what life is about. And that kind of faith rings very true for me, as it does for all who truly believe.